Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another session of Career Talk Thursdays. I'm Tamar, and I will be your host again for today. I would like to begin today's session with an acknowledgement of country. As we gather for this meeting physically dispersed and virtually constructed, let us take a moment to reflect on the meaning of place, and by doing so, recognize the various traditional lands on which we do our business today. We acknowledge the elders, past and present, of all the land we work and live on, and their ancestral spirits with gratitude and respect. We extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. I am joining the call today from the Sydney CBD, which is the traditional land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. So to properly introduce myself, my name is Tamar and I'm a first year law graduate at Allens. I completed a clerkship at Allens in the summer between 2020 and 2021, and then I worked as a paralegal at Allens while I finished off my 5th year at uni. I then graduated at the end of last year, and in February, I started as a grad in the intellectual property team here at Allens. So this is the second session of the 3-part Law Career Talk series hosted by Grad Australia. And for those of you who are not yet familiar with Grad Australia, it's a graduate career site where you can explore and get to know graduate employers, get a backstage pass of what it's like working in a role in their organisation, and apply for programs that are the best fit for you. You can visit gradaustralia.com.au and set up your account to get notified of open clerkship applications and other opportunities. So today's session is titled Preparing for an Interview at a Top Legal Firm. So the focus will be on the interview process, what you can expect, and how best to prepare. And we are very lucky to have 3 guests from Norton Rose Fulbright joining us today to give some really valuable insights and guidance in this area. So we have with us Ryan, Becky, and Mrith, and I think I'll pass over to them to introduce themselves.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. It's fantastic to be here. My name is Ryan Leckie. I'm the National Advisor of our Early Talent Programs here at the firm, and we'll be working very closely with penultimate and final year law students as they prepare for their clerkship and graduate programs. Mrith, over to you.
Hi everyone, my name is Mrith. I'm an associate in the disputes team at Norton Rose in the Sydney office.
Hi everyone, my name is Becky. I'm a HR coordinator at Norton Rose and I manage the clerkship recruitment process here in Perth. So hopefully I've got some good tips to help guide you through it.
Great, thank you so much, guys. So if there's nothing else that anyone wants to add, I think let's get straight into the presentation.
Fantastic, thanks so much. I will attempt to just bring up my other screen. One moment. Okay, I will say that please, if you have questions, you can put them in the chat and we'll make our way through them. If not, we've got some time at the end to have some conversations. Okay, so preparing for an interview. So I'm sure that this is quite an overwhelming time for most students when they're thinking about the interview process to be successful for a clerkship program. And one of the burning questions leading up to the clerkship recruitment process, and understandably so, is what to expect in the interview stages. What are the questions? How should I prepare to answer them? So what we've got today is really hopefully a bit of an overview on what you can expect. So when I think about the process, I've done it for a couple of years now. People are always going to be, it's hard to anticipate what questions are going to be put forth. Lots of firms will ask different questions, so sometimes it's hard to predict. But I think the best thing you can do is to go in and be comfortable and confident in who you are, your experience, because that's ultimately what firms are looking for. So, number 1, do your research on the firm. Remember, it is important to be authentic when deciding to apply for a position. So you really need to think carefully about why you're applying to the firm as opposed to any other legal firm. You should also ensure you know what the firm does and what certain practice areas it offers in your local offices. For example, does the firm have any particular values, opportunities for career progression, international secondments, an attractive client base, communities, committees, pro bono initiatives, sustainability initiatives which align with your values? So whatever it might be, taking time to review the firm's website and articles online to confirm your interest in obtaining a position at that firm will shine through in the interview. Point number 2, review your application again, and then one more time, review your application. I know from my experience when putting my application together for jobs when I started my career, I felt like I knew it back to front, but then sometimes, you know, you pick up on things for the third or fourth time that you're like, how did I miss this the first time around? I'd also encourage you to, you know, if you've got any peers or family or friends that are willing to do a read, that's also a really great way to be super prepared. So make sure you're familiar with everything submitted in your application material. Before your clerkship interview, it might be a good idea to get out your resume, cover letter, and go through it. You'd be surprised just how many questions come from your written application. So be prepared to kind of bring examples and talk about everything that's on those documents. Point number 3, brainstorm some practical examples. So you'll be asked to link your experience or personal attributes to the key requirements of the role. So to avoid being caught out on the spot, it's best to list some of these in advance. For example, you might be asked about personal experiences related to leadership, teamwork, conflict resolution, prioritization, or resilience. Even if you aren't asked directly, to explain a time you've demonstrated a behavior or skill, it won't hurt you to throw a couple into, into your response. Next point, think about any questions you want to ask. Remember that it's okay to ask your interviewer questions. In fact, I'd encourage it. As much as the interview is a chance for the firm to assess your suitability, equally, it's an opportunity for you to assess your own interest in working there. So look, you don't need to conjure up some big elaborate academic point either. It might just be as simple as asking the interviewer what they love most about the firm. And finally, practice. So I'm sure you've heard it all before, but it can really help with the nerves to practice your answers to some common interview questions. At first, it might feel, a bit silly and awkward, but with a bit of luck, it will help you grow more comfortable talking about your interest and your interests and experiences, and prepare you for the real thing. So to help you get started, here are some of the common questions that could be brought up in a clerkship recruitment process across a number of firms. So what do you know about the firm, and why do you want to work here? We have, what was your favorite or least favorite subject at university? There'll be questions like, how do you stay organized and prioritize competing tasks? We also have, tell us about a time when you had to come up with a solution to a problem you were facing. Tell us about a time when you made a mistake. What did you do? How did you fix it? How do you react to group environments? Are you someone who likes to take the lead or sit back and listen? Also, we'll probably, I understand for some students, they might not necessarily know what part of the law they want to specialize in, and that's kind of the benefit of a clerkship program and a graduate program, being able to rotate through various teams and kind of find lots of interest to you. But then again, there are people that come through the interviews and they've already got a good idea of the type of lawyer they want to be. So we might ask you, what are those practice areas you're interested in, and why? I think this is a really good question that is most likely to come up, but what are you hoping to gain from, the clerkship program in the event you are successful? But my favorite part of the interview is when we get to know the candidates on a more of a personal level. So outside of work and study, what are you doing on the weekend? Like what are you doing with your spare time? Do you have any hobbies, interests? I think that's a really great way for us to get to know the real you, but also for you to, see if this is something that aligns with the firm's values. And I know I always say, there's probably a better way of putting it, but I think a big part of your interview is almost like that vibe check. You want to see that you guys are kind of on the same path, and you'd be happy to work here.
I might just jump in super quickly with something that I thought maybe from my perspective as someone who just did the interviews is that a lot of the time, the people who are asking you these questions, they're not expecting like a script with like a really polished, perfect answer all about your legal career and your legal experience. I remember in an interview that I had, they'd asked me about a time that I had failed at something. And I'm sitting there thinking, oh gosh, like, how do I say something that's going to impress them about a time that I failed? And I told them about the time that I failed my P's exam multiple times for my license. And, somehow managed to talk about how I was resilient and kept trying, and they seemed to be satisfied with that. But, it's not necessarily just about, I was a paralegal here and I was a volunteer here. Like, I think that the vibe that I got from my interviewers was that they were really interested in my achievements and my interests and the experiences that I'd had outside my strictly legal career up until then.
Definitely. And I don't think, being on the other side of the table when we have people come through, we don't expect everybody to have it all together. This is the start of what can be a very long and successful career. So sometimes it is kind of hard to admit, certain flaws, or maybe you just haven't perfected something. Because I always think it's funny when, they have the interview questions where it's like, what's your biggest weakness? And then people will go in with, I'm just too organized that I can't kind of concentrate. But I mean, you got to spin it how you can. So I thought we could hand things over to Becky, and she will chat a bit more about preparing for an interview.
Yeah. And I mean, just on that question about weaknesses or perhaps a flaw of yours, we don't expect you to be superhuman robot fit into a little brief. Everyone does have a weakness and a flaw, but if you can show that perhaps you've learned something from it, or it's given you some form of guidance for the future, that's great. That's what we really want to know. Like, what's a weak area and how can you work on it, or what have you learned from it? So I think just taking that into consideration is important as well.
Definitely. Good point, Becky.
So just carrying on from Ryan's post slide, preparing for your interview. So I would say, draw on your current experience, and as previously mentioned, not everyone's going to have experience in professional services or in a firm. So if you can try and think about your life experiences, and how you could maybe link that with any potential situations or scenarios that you might use at work. So you could think about situations where you might have worked under pressure. You might have worked with conflicting deadlines. I mean, if you've just gone through uni, of course you've worked with conflicting deadlines, and of course you're working under pressure. So don't be afraid to use that as your example as well. And you'll also probably be asked about time management. And again, you've just gone through all of this work that is so heavily involved with time management. So use what you can and focus on what you do have rather than what you don't have. So instead of thinking like, oh, I don't have experience in a firm, think, oh, I do have this instead. And, you've got life experience. So just drawing on that is really important as well. And when you're answering situational questions like that, you want to try and use like an SAO model. So that will be situation. So you want to outline the situation that took place. And then you'll want to talk about the actions. So what actions did you take to resolve that situation? And the O is what's the outcome? So how did your actions resolve everything overall? So if you can use that method, I think that will be really helpful. There is another method called STAR, but I find that if I'm in an interview and I'm trying to remember everything and all my experience, it's too long. It's too
Yep.
hard to try and remember. So the
The
SAO
one letter does make a difference, Becky. I will say that it does.
Yeah. And then I would say, so dress in a way that makes you feel comfortable. Obviously, keep in mind that we're a corporate firm, but when you walk through those doors into an office, whichever firm it is, you know, they're going to want you to bring your entire self to that interview. So dress in a way that feels like you're representing yourself. I mean, in our firm, we have a dress for your day policy, and that's something that everyone takes advantage of as well. So dress how you feel best represents you. And also, when you're answering your questions, just take your time to answer them. If you need more time to think of an answer, no one's going to hold that against you. That just means that you're really thinking through what's being asked of you and that you really do care about the outcome. And if you do feel like, oh, I don't have an answer for this right now, I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, can I perhaps put that question to the side and come back to it at the end? So that will just give you a little bit more thinking time as well to get your answer straight. And then just on that as well, so when you are attending our offices, we want you to bring your entire self. We're really big on authenticity. And diversity and inclusion is something that we really do pride ourselves on. So if there's any accommodations that you need, definitely communicate that with your interviewer or your HR contact, whoever's been in contact with you. And I'm sure that they'll be more than willing to make any accommodations, and you can have the confidence that that will always be kept confidential, just between your interviewing panel. And it can be a whole range of things, but if there's something that will help you succeed in your interview and you need an accommodation, please, do feel free to reach out. And that's it on that slide. So move on to the next one. So you might have questions around, how do I know what's expected of me in a clerkship role? And there's a whole range of things that are going to be expected of you. So to help you really align your experience with the firm expectations, we'll always provide you with a role profile, and that's a document, and it just describes what the role requires and any skills and knowledge and experience that are needed to succeed in that role. So we'll give that to you on just prior to your commencement, so that you're well aware of what you're going into and where the expectations are. So I'll just quickly run through a few subsections of a role profile so that you know what might be expected of your clerkship. So we've got client centricity. So do you promptly respond to requests by internal and external clients? Do you consistently deliver work at an agreed standard within timeframes that are required? Do you build rapport with clients, and do you work to not only meet their expectations, but do you work to exceed them as well? Do you invest your time to develop industry knowledge? Do you seek out feedback, and are you also providing feedback where you can? And then we've also got people and culture. So are you proactive in seeking out work opportunities? If you're not sure on something, do you seek out clarification? Do you demonstrate a high level of performance and commitment to the tasks that you're delegated? Do you build effective and positive relationships with your colleagues? Do you demonstrate empathy? Are you respectful and patient? Are you sensitive towards others? Do you understand and value different perspectives and contributions? Do you work efficiently with high attention to detail, and do you deliver high quality outcomes? Do you prioritize and plan your workload to maintain those competing deadlines? That's an important one that's going to come up in your interviews, and it will be with you for your entire career. Do you seek and respond to constructive feedback? So being able to receive constructive feedback is really important because that will see you succeed throughout your whole career. And then we've got business efficiency. Do you attend practice team strategy forums and build your understanding of your own role? Do you balance your development on focus on improving legal expertise and acquiring broader business knowledge? Do you demonstrate capability to leverage and understand the firm's technology and tools? And then we've got technical expertise. So obviously this isn't somewhere where we would expect you to be a subject matter expert the second you come in, because we know that you're at the very start of your career. So do you show an interest in understanding the firm's practice areas and the legal areas of expertise? Do you understand and adhere to all ethical and legal practice requirements? Do you communicate messages in a logical, clear, and concise manner? And do you present with confidence and professionalism? Do you produce commercially focused written documents and emails that are accurate and well structured? And are you an effective listener? And do you respect and consider the views of other people in your team? And that's about it when it comes to summarizing what you can expect to see in your role profile. So I think across the board, they'll all be very similar, and especially with the technical expertise, don't feel panicked as though we will expect you to be an expert right off the bat, because this is just the beginning. So
Exactly.
that's all from me on the role profile.
I will say, you will notice that there's kind of a very stripped back version of a role profile within the job description of the application. So I know that when you go to visit all the different websites to apply, have a little read about, read the fine print before you hit the apply button, because it will tell you the types of things that each firm is looking for and what will stand out. It will also tell you how to address your application. So it's fantastic that Becky was able to kind of walk through the role profile and kind of what will be expected of you, as you start your career. But also know that, for example, here at Norton Rose Fulbright, we assign buddies, and they're usually a graduate or a lawyer that had started the previous year. So you can feel free to ask them questions, and they will know exactly how you're feeling, because they were there the year before. So sometimes it's, you don't even know what the questions are to ask, but they're kind of your safety net. So I would definitely lean into that. You'll probably be paired up with a buddy for your interview, so make sure that you're asking them more questions about the process that they went through, and that kind of an overview of what kind of a day in the life is for them. You'll also be assigned with a mentor, and that's usually somebody that's a bit more of a senior lawyer, and then they can kind of get into the nitty-gritty with you and help you with the technical stuff. And then in addition to that, you'll also have a supervising partner, so the partner that leads up that practice. And just those three being allocated to you is a fantastic resource. But you'll also have your clerkship and graduate cohorts. So I know that that's something I love to see through, the interview stage. People already kind of networking and making connections, and then being each other's supporters. I think that's really important to remember. You're not there to compete. There is space for people, and we just want to see you doing your best. So we'll jump on to the next slide. So Marith is going to chat a bit about, preparing for the interview with the CVs and the cover letters. So over to you, Marith.
Hi everyone, it's great to be able to speak to you today, and thanks Ryan and Becky. So as Ryan mentioned, even though we're talking about the interview stage of the application process, it's so important to be fully across your CV and your cover letter to make sure that it presents the best possible version of yourself. When an interviewer sits down and prepares for their interview with you, because they do prepare, the first introduction they have to you is your cover letter and your CV. That's that's going to be their first source when they think about what questions they're going to ask you, and will really set the tone for the rest of the interview. So it's important that even outside of the context of your initial written application, you've taken the time to think about what the actual purpose of your CV and cover letter is in the application process. And it serves those two purposes. First, to get you in the door, to have an interview, and secondly, to form a framework and a background for the actual interview itself. So we thought it would be helpful just to talk through some tips on what you should be including in your CV and cover letter, and how it should be structured so that you cover all the important things that need to be covered. So starting first with your CV, the key thing is how it looks visually. As soon as someone picks up that piece of paper, you want them to get a really good snapshot of exactly who you are, what skills you bring to the table, and why you're applying for the job. So things that you want to think about from that perspective is consistency of formatting. So are you using bullet points or aren't you? How are you formatting the dates of work experience and extracurricular activity? Are you using the same kind of headings? The font, the use of italics. So one thing that I do in my CV is that, for example, I make sure that the title of the job and the firm that I've worked for, or the organization I've worked for, is in bold. And that way it's clear as when someone reads through, they can say, oh, that person's worked here, here, and here. And I might use italics if I'm talking about what period of time I worked in the firm. So using different sorts of formatting for different pieces of information without going overboard can make it easier to digest the information that's on the CV. So that goes to the effectiveness. The formatting needs to be easy to follow, so that the person who's reading the CV knows your experiences at a glance. And you also don't want it to be any more than 2 pages. I've been working since I was 18, and my CV is 2 pages exactly. You don't want to create more work for the person who's reviewing it or preparing for your interview. It's just meant to be an overview of highlights of your key experience for the role, rather than an extensive list of everything that you've ever done. Secondly, we've got style. So what sort of language are you using? Is it appropriate for the job that you're applying for? Are you using headings and subheadings? You don't want a CV that's just all text. You do want to have some blank spaces, because that makes it easier to review and to communicate the information about yourself. So if we move on to the next slide.
We actually have a couple questions on that in the chat. I thought it might be useful to just address quickly while we're here on this topic. So someone has asked if a page border is necessary on the CV.
It's not necessary. If you want to include one, that's also not a problem, but it's not something that every CV needs to have.
And the second question for this is, how should I deal with the overqualification issue? So I think a couple comments up, I can see that individual's completed maybe at quite a few different degrees. And I think that I know some of my colleagues who perhaps are a few years older and have had a maybe later career change, or come back and done a JD or something and have had almost like a whole career before that. How can they deal with that in terms of talking about experience, but obviously making it relevant for the job?
Sure. So I definitely think if it's something that you're proud of, you should include it in your CV. If it's a professional qualification you have, if it's a degree that you've attained, definitely include it. It can be a talking point in the interview, and you can provide some more color to why, for example, if you're coming to a legal career later in life, or if you've had lots of other experiences that might not be directly relevant to a legal career, you can provide a bit more color on that in your cover letter and in your interview. So I definitely don't think you should shy away Firms like NRF in particular are looking for people with diverse and interesting experiences, because we know that that makes us a richer firm and we're able to provide a better service to our clients as a consequence. So don't be afraid of, an overqualification, of being overqualified. Put it in and explain your history and your background in the cover letter and the interview itself.
Thank you. I think that's the only questions we have on that at the moment. So happy for you guys to keep going.
Thanks, Tamar. Another really important thing is grammar, spelling, and punctuation. We're lawyers. We deal with paper every day. We're writing advice to clients. We're communicating with lots of different people. One of the core skills of being a good lawyer is attention to detail and effective written communication. And one of the best ways you can demonstrate this from the start of the application process is having a CV and cover letter that is grammatically correct, has no typos, has no spelling errors. So one of the things that I do to check on that is I read it out loud, because I find that I find errors easier when I hear it rather than reading the same piece of paper over and over again. As Ryan mentioned before, you can have a trusted friend or family member to give your your CV a proofread, and they might pick up, oh, that sentence doesn't quite flow like I think you should, or I think that you should include this experience that you haven't included because it's relevant. And also another thing is tense. Make sure that's consistent and appropriate. So if you're talking about past experiences, use past tense. If you're talking about current experiences, use current tense, use present tense, sorry. So just make sure that that's all consistent throughout. So just thinking more broadly about substance and what actually needs to go into your CV, you need to have your contact information, which is your phone and email address. You need to include your education information. So when did you graduate from high school? When are you expected to graduate from your current degree? What's your WAM in your current degree and any previous degrees you might have? And include that in reverse chronological order. So your most recent qualification should go at the top and work backwards from there. Also include any awards or scholarships or other programs that you might have been involved in that are relevant from an academic perspective. Then you'd include your work experience. So when you're talking about your work experience, make sure you include the organization you worked for, the dates that you're in that role, what the role was, and what the weekly commitment was for that role. So if you're doing it full-time or 2 or 3 days a week, make sure that that's included there. And then when you're describing your experience within that role, one thing that I find is really helpful is to make each bullet point to describe your role start with an action or a verb. So for example, you managed a team of 3 retail staff, or you drafted a report on a due diligence exercise. That way, when whoever's reading your CV is going through it, they can clearly tick that off against skills in the role profile and what they're looking for. So they go, oh, you manage a team. Okay, great. Your work, you've got leadership capabilities and you're effective in a team scenario. And it's easier for them to match all of that sort of up. Make sure that you include any extracurricular involvement, again, in the same format that you would for your work experience. And definitely include a section on your skills and interests and hobbies. Those tend to be the most important and interesting parts of an interview. Say, for example, you say that you enjoy watching Netflix. You might find that you spend 15 minutes talking to your interviewer about recent shows that you've watched and why you've enjoyed them. So don't be embarrassed or shy about including that section. It's really important and it fleshes you out as a whole person, which is who the interviewer wants to see.
I will say, Ruth, on that point, I think people need to remember if you've been invited to interview at a firm, it means you've ticked a lot of boxes already. So the interview is really just that kind of getting to know you stage, the conversational piece. So yes, like we've said throughout this entire presentation, make sure you know kind of your work history, CV, cover letter, all back to front. But don't be afraid to speak a bit about you, because that's, well, to me, even more important. I think that really shines through on who your character is.
Yeah, I think like from my perspective as someone who went to a lot of these talks, something that came up was in your area where you talk about your skills or interests, don't say like I'm proficient at Word because that's kind of an expected thing probably at this point. Maybe venture more into like your personal interests or other skills. Like I know I wrote on there that I've played an instrument since I was a kid, and one of my interviews for 15 minutes of the hour-long interview, we spoke about music and our favorite clarinet players. So you never know what kind of connection you might make with people.
Exactly. Or you want to talk about dedication? I binged all of Stranger Things in one weekend. I'm proud of that. So, all right, we'll move on to the next slide.
So then we've got the cover letter. One of the mistakes that I think some people make is that they don't tailor their cover letter to each clerkship or grad position that they're applying for. HR can pick up a generic cover letter straight away. It's super obvious. So make sure that you take the time to sit down and do your research on the firm, and why you're applying for that specific role at that specific firm. So a successful cover letter is going to highlight and draw on the important parts of your CV. If there's anything that you want to explain about your CV, you can put that here. You can talk about your experience and why you're interested in that specific role. As I mentioned before, this is one of the first examples of your written communication skills, which is one of the most important parts of being a lawyer. So make sure that you write well and it's proofread properly. It shows your skills, education, and experience and why that's relevant to the role. It'll address any specific selection criteria. It draws attention to your achievements and encourages prospective employers to read further into your CV. So when an interviewer or a HR representative is preparing for the interview, they're going to pick up your CV first because that's going to be the best illustration for them of who you are as a candidate and the sort of skills and capabilities that you have. So you want to make sure that it's persuasive and brings your personality out on the page. Can we move on to the next slide? So I covered some of these points already when we were talking about CVs, but I definitely think it bears repeating because you don't want to get written off straight away because there's a typo in your cover letter or your CV. So make sure that it's the font, the size of the font. Don't try and cram heaps of information onto one page by making the font size 6 because that makes it impossible to read as well. So you want to have a decent sized font, that you don't make the margins tiny on the edges to fit in more information. Your tone should be polite and professional. You don't need to be overly formal, but you do want to strike the right tone. Again, make sure you read it out loud to make sure the sentences make sense, that they're not overly long, and that you're consistent with the tense throughout. So just going to the building blocks of a cover letter, it should include your contact information, so your phone number and email address, the HR and firm address. So do your research, find out who the HR recruitment contact is, and address the letter to them. Include the date, include the right subject line. And this is the easiest way to make sure that you send the right cover letter to the right firm. The subject line should say 2022-2023 clerkship program, Norton Rose Fulbright. And you should name your cover letter that way as a PDF. So you're attaching the right cover letter to each application. Include an appropriate salutation or closing. So, dear Mr. Leckie, if you're applying for NRF, and then sign off with like a yours sincerely or warm regards, whatever you prefer. And then in terms of the actual content of the substance of the cover letter, you should include an introduction, which is a brief background on yourself and your skills. Then why commercial law, why the specific firm you're applying for, what skills, expertise, and experience you'd bring to the role, addressing any specific selection criteria, and then a wrap-up paragraph to tie everything together. This is your conclusion. We've all written essays before. We all know how to structure a persuasive piece of writing. So sort of think of it that way. You've got the key points that you're making on why you want to work at that firm and why they should choose you, and then a neat little conclusion to thank whoever it is who's reading your CV for their time and consideration of your application.
Definitely. We've just had a question come through. Should you send your CV and cover letter as a PDF or Word document? So I can speak on this, especially for our application process. As I said before, go read the job description and the application. So for example, ours has asked if you can make sure that it's a PDF. That would be preferred. I know that a lot of firms have similar systems, and it's just an easier way to kind of, pick things up. But yes, you can also submit it as a Word document, but it is preferred to be a PDF.
And just from like a pedantic perspective, I prefer PDF because I know that no one else can change it or make any edits to the document once it's received. So I just prefer that from because I'm a bit of a control freak.
No, good point.
And just on that as well, so when if you were to upload a Word document, if you've copy and pasted, say, my name and then the firm name, sometimes for whatever reason, depending on what portal you're uploading it to, if it's a Word document, the font might do something a little bit funky. But if you do it as a PDF, it's kind of all just, it is what it is. And, so that's a good one. And then I think I'll move on to networking and personal branding. So this is a really strong area that I think you should all try and get involved with. So you might not be as of yet, but if you don't have a LinkedIn, after this session, I would say go and make a LinkedIn today. So what is networking? So basically, it's a strategy on how you build relationships with other like-minded professionals that'll be in your career field, other career fields too. And it's just a really good way that you can get a clear understanding of what your career field looks like, different pathways you might have in the future. It'll also give you a good idea of what the market's like for candidates as well. And it'll always help you build on those professional relationships and friendships. Also, another thing that I think is really helpful is when you go on LinkedIn, you can kind of see someone's maybe started as a clerk here, they've moved into a grad role, and you can see their different pathway that they've taken. And that can be a little bit of inspiration for you if you're not quite sure what your pathway will look like as well. So I think if you've ever heard that term, it's not what you know, it's who you know, that comes down to networking. And you can do it in a number of ways, really. You could attend career sort of events. In Perth here, we have the Perth Law Careers events. We have different fairs at all the universities as well. There'll be sundowners and networking events, things like that. You can also reach out to people on LinkedIn. You could even go onto a law firm's website, look at a practice area you're interested in, and find the contact details for different lawyers that are in those practice areas. And if you were to reach out to a lawyer, I know at Norton Rose everyone is keen to get a coffee and a chat. So if you're confident enough to reach out to someone and say, I'm really interested in this firm for XYZ reason, I've seen that you've been working on a certain matter, you're in a practice area that I'm interested in, did you want to get a coffee sometime? Most people are going to be very keen to talk about their experience and give you a little bit of guidance because they've been exactly where you are right now. So I think that's a really good way to get started. Do it online if you're a little bit nervous to start going to these events, and just reach out to people who are in practice areas that you're very interested in. And if you're not sure on what practice areas you're interested in, I catch up with people for coffees whenever they want. I'm happy to give people a little bit of guidance and, have a chat about different practice areas and what we do have on offer. So from a HR perspective, you can also network with HR professionals too. And then I'll just move on to personal branding as well. So Your personal branding is very important to a successful career. And again, it's a strategy that you'll use to really present yourself to your audience. And in this scenario, your audience are your interviewers. Um, so I think it would be a good idea to kind of build like an elevator pitch, they call it. So it's just a brief summary about yourself. Um, and if you're nervous in your interview, you'll have this memorized in the back of your head, ready to go, and it'll be like a no brainer. You'll just have it then and there. So, what you'll want to do when you're building an elevator pitch is really start by introducing yourself. You want to do it in a really concise and simple way. Don't feel the need to overstate it, just use simple terms. And move on to tell us a little bit about your accomplishments. So it doesn't have to be anything too out there. Have you recently volunteered somewhere? Have you maybe you got marks on an assignment that you're really proud of that you didn't quite think you'd get there, and that's a big accomplishment for you? Or maybe you've received an award or a nomination for an award, and that's something that you're proud of. So that's something that you can use as your accomplishments. You will then want to move on and talk about why you're drawn to NRF. So, this will really show that you've done your research as well. So, can you maybe talk about a matter that you've seen that really stands out to you? Or could you perhaps talk about a practice area that you're really interested in, and maybe you've spoken to a partner? Maybe you've done some networking already. Maybe you can tie your personal branding in with networking that you've done and show us that you've really gone that step ahead to really get invested and learn as much as you can about the firm. And then you would want to end with your value add. So, maybe you do have proven experience in a firm or professional services, or perhaps you've worked in a high pressure environment. And if you haven't, that's fine too, because we don't expect people to come to us with lots of work experience. So maybe you could think about your skills that you can apply to the workplace. So maybe, again, going back to your uni assignments, maybe you've got the ability to manage multiple deadlines. Maybe you work really well under pressure. Maybe it's your personality. Maybe you're very personable and calm and collected in a high pressure environment. And that's something that you can really draw on. And if you do use examples like that, just make sure that you can back them up with relevant evidence as well. So if you feel that you are very calm and collected in high pressure situations, but you don't have work experience, can you use another experience to back that up? So I'll give you a very brief example of my personal elevator pitch that I would use, just so you can see how it all kind of ties together. So for my intro, I would start and say, "Hi, my name's Becky and I'm the HR coordinator at Norton Rose. I've got a strong legal background that spans over 8 years, and I've got a focus in legal practice management and human resources." And then if I move on to my accomplishments, I would say throughout my career, I've worked in various roles. They've really allowed me to understand the inner workings of a corporate firm and how I can best support the balance of business needs and employee needs. I've been involved with a range of things from corporate strategy planning to KPI restructuring to bulk skill gap analysis. I'm really drawn to NRF because of their fantastic cultural representation and their global reach and their forward thinking with diversity and inclusion, which is a key area that I'm interested in. And then if I was to move on to my value add, I'd say I'm a commercially minded person and I've got the proven ability to plan business strategies that align with business needs, as well as enhancing the work life of employees. So, I guess some keynotes around personal branding in your elevator pitch is that it's not something that you'll just use in person. You'll also use it on LinkedIn, email, over the phone. If someone reaches out to you on LinkedIn, you might have that. You might have that saved on your computer somewhere, ready to go. And if you start chatting, then you want to introduce yourself. You've got it then and there. So I highly suggest that you just have a go at drafting something. And every time you say it, it's not going to come out the exact same way. But if you've got like a rough idea of how you can present yourself to your interviewers, I think you'll go in feeling really well equipped and confident. So that's all on personal branding and networking.
Thank you guys so much. That was really great and really thorough. We do have a couple questions left just for the last few minutes, but I guess just drawing on what Becky was just talking about, something that I found that was uniform across every single interview that I did was the first question was, tell us a bit about yourself. And it's like a terrifying question if you go in and you're unprepared because, you know, you're like, oh gosh, where do I start? So something that I always try to do, and I practiced in photo booth like many times and recorded myself to see what it sounded like. But it was something like start off with just, you know, my name and then a sentence on kind of my professional self and then a sentence on like my personal self. So I would say, I'm Tamar, I'm in my 4th year at this university, this is what I'm studying, and I've worked and volunteered at A, B, and C places. And then I might have gone and said on a more personal note, I really like this, I do a bit of this, and, you know, a couple things like that. And I found that that helped me really calm down when I knew that that was kind of what my first answer was going to be. And I think that it translated quite well into my interviews. Obviously, that kind of system doesn't work for everyone, but I found that it was a good segue into another question for them to ask me. And it was usually like they would build on that. I don't know if anyone from NRF wants to add to that, but that was kind of
No,
my
definitely.
I
experience.
agree. Yeah.
I think what's also helpful, because it can be like obviously awkward to talk about yourself. So when you're writing these cover letters and CVs, you're like, oh, who am I? But it would be really good if you could reach out to somebody, a peer or a colleague or a friend that knows you better than anyone. And sometimes hearing what they would say about you is a really great way that you could be like, oh yeah, I would have never actually said that about myself, but if that's what's coming across, maybe that's what I can put forward as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got another few questions. So on that, someone's asked, is it okay if I'll tell me a bit about yourself, our story on how we came to where we are and why we decided to do law and specifically commercial law? I
Yes.
found that that was usually the follow-up question. So
Yeah. Generally
yeah.
speaking, that's something that we would ask as well, because maybe I'm just nosy, but I love to know why people, how they get to where they are, why they've chosen what they've chosen. So yeah, definitely include that. But if you don't, you'll probably be asked it anyway.
Yeah, and maybe someone who's got some interviewing experience can answer this, but it was kind of mentioned to me once I already had my job and by like a couple of people around who had done some interviews that if you say to someone, why did you choose to come to commercial law? And they say, oh, well, I just love commercial law and I love the thought of being a commercial lawyer. Like, I mean, does anyone really like love it that much, or is it something that you're interested in and passionate about, or, you know, something else? Like, what's the kind of way that we could express that we're really interested in pursuing this path without talking about how much we love the corporate world?
Do you mind if I just step in on how I approached answering that question? Because I agree with you, Tamar. It just feels fake to be like, oh my gosh, commercial law's always been my passion. Even though I did love suits at uni, and I thought that's life I want to lead. But I think a really effective way to answer that question without feeling insincere is talk about the specifics on what you think the role involves. So you might say you're interested in a career in commercial law because you know it involves teamwork and collaborating with other people and solving like technical problems, and you're involved in big matters that might be on the front page of the news and you find that really exciting. So think about, rather than like commercial law as a banner, like what do you think that actually means to be a commercial lawyer, and why do you think you'll enjoy that?
Cool, thank you. We've just got 2 more questions before we wrap up, but Mandy has asked, Just wondering if there is a defined WAM range that the firm is looking for.
I can speak on this. I know that look, it's not all the same for each firm. So if I'm speaking on behalf of Norton Rose Fulbright, we take into consideration a variety of kind of key areas when we're looking at an application. Yes, obviously your academics, we'd want to see that you're doing quite well. You're not getting fails, and I think that would help. But I mean, sometimes we see people come through that have the best WAM score, but maybe they're lacking on some work experience or kind of lived experiences. And I just like to see somebody who's a bit more well-rounded. So don't stress out too much about that WAM score. I promise it's not you know, everything. So look, I think it's I've heard kind of people's background stories about I was, you know, studying law, but I was also kind of taking care of my family and working a part-time job. You can see that through this semester, maybe my grades dropped, but that's because I had this life circumstance, and it kind of it all goes together. So no, don't stress too much. I mean, if you're studying law and applying, I think you know, you're smart already.
We have another question about cover letters. So someone's asked, like, what are our thoughts on using some informal experience or slightly informal approach to some aspects of the cover letter, or should it be kept strictly professional? I mean, I can talk a little bit about the way that I approached it, which was that I tried to make it about myself in a way that like linked to the firm. So I was still making it professional in the sense that I was talking about the skills that would be applicable in like a professional environment, but that didn't necessarily just mean professional experiences. So I spoke about, you know, my family life and how I have 4 younger siblings, and, you know, managing all those people is kind of teamwork, and those kinds of things. So I actually did mention a bit more personal stuff and some unrelated things to the law, and personal hobbies that had given me skills or values that I thought would translate well into the kind of clerkship experience. And I'm not sure if that was necessarily addressing the exact question you had, but I think maybe it's okay to make it a bit more personal rather than like a robotic, very professional thing.
I'd say that's spot on.
Yeah.
Yeah, we want, like we said, we want to get to know everyone. So if you can personalize it, and again, not everyone is going to have professional services or firm experience. So if you want to tie in lived experience that you've got outside of work, throw that in. Like, I think we're very happy to see that come across.
Great, thank you. And just our last question now is, how can I address the gap between my last job to now in a professional way? It's a 5-year gap, which is due to moving to Australia and personal matters.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's obviously important to be as honest as possible. It sounds like you do have some, you know, reasoning behind that situation. So feel free to dive into that as much as you feel comfortable. But look, a clerkship program is just the beginning of your career. So don't feel like it's, you know, this is going to ruin your chances. We just want to see you put your best self forward, and then hopefully we can help you with the next 5 years of your career.
And just practically, that's something that you would address in your cover letter. So you might say, you might say something along the lines of, from this period to this period in my life, I was busy moving career and dealing with family and personal issues. And you can leave it at that if that's as much detail as you want to go into, or you can provide some more information. But that's sort of the appropriate location to explain the situation.
All right, thank you so much. And I think that's probably all the time we have for questions today. But I just wanted to emphasize something that Becky said earlier, which is that please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm more than happy to have a coffee or a chat with anyone. I've already had a couple people over the past few weeks reaching out. a couple people just wanted to chat online, and I've met up for a coffee with a couple people already. So seriously, like, me and all my friends, like, I know this is pretty broad across the firms. We were only going through this a couple years ago. So we're more than happy to help out and be a kind supporter as you go through this process, which it is a stressful process. But yeah, I just wanted to say thank you so much to our presenters and everyone for their questions. And please feel free to join in next week again for our next session. So the next week's session is going to be about how to approach and how to get started in your first job. So whether that might be as a law grad or a clerk, kind of how to adjust and how to get into that. So we'd really like to see you all there.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Good luck, everyone.
See ya.